Welcome back. I will turn first to Ms. Cott. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
All systems go. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much. Welcome back. It is 1:22 and the afternoon of February 6, 2025, and we are reconvening with respect to the water rights hearing regarding the proposed sites reservoir project. We left off with cross-examination of uh, the final witness in this phase of the hearing, Mr. Walker. And I indicated before we broke for lunch that I think I'd like to pick up with any discussion we need to have about rebuttal, in case we need to think about anything further in our afternoon. Sometimes it helps me to have a chat, and then if we need to think and come back to it later. I had a chance to some extent to go over the exhibits that we received, the rebuttal exhibits that we received. And thank you to I understand some of at least one party or maybe some others had some back and forth making sure we have all the exhibits and they're properly uploaded. So thank you for those parties who were able to double check that. We have a number of witnesses on rebuttal. This is not a surprise. And I am not right now on the fly prepared to talk about time limits. My intent would be to use a similar methodology that we used for calculating time limits for the cases in chief, and to use the same kind of chess clock approach we've been doing, although this phase is a little different because it's a little this ITP phase is one-sided, if you will. I will work on those and distribute a ruling as soon as possible, setting those time limits in accordance with the groupings that we have been using. It will be based in part on the number of witnesses, but also just an equitable distribution of time. And I need to match that against the number of hearing days that we have identified for rebuttal. If we need additional hearing days, I just haven't crunched the numbers, so I'm not even going to make a guess as to whether I don't plan to take any off calendar. That's certainly the case. But if we need to, it looks like we won't be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish with the given days. We will need to talk about adding additional days, and I'll try to do that as soon as possible because I know we all have schedules that are difficult. Right now, we're scheduled to start rebuttal on February 21st. As I had indicated in past rulings, we were not going to go straight from this ITP portion of the hearing in. We were going to not start the rebuttal portion of the hearing until at least February 21st. So that would be the intent. It sure looks like we're going to get finished today. So what I would expect is that we will end up taking off calendar February 7th. We already took February 10th off calendar as well, and then we would take off the 11th and 12th. So you would have those returned to you, if you will, for additional time for preparation or whatever else you need to do. So with all of that background about where I am and thinking, I will look to the room. Are there procedural issues about rebuttal that we should talk about at this time? And Mr. Hitchings, you're first with the hand, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, hearing officer. I think one thing that would be helpful was if the parties have certain panels that they've expect to present their witnesses in. I know we've started to chart that out for ours. As you probably saw, we have 11 witnesses. Most of them have already testified. There's a few new ones with some very limited additional subject areas to cover on rebuttal. And when we've charted out what
sorry,
panels
let me pause you, Mr. Hitchings. I apologize. Ms. Cott, did you have something? I want to make sure we're on the record properly. Is there something you needed from us?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure, did I hear tomorrow is off
Well,
calendar?
let's make sure we finish. And
Oh,
I want to make
okay.
sure you have this on the record. I want to make sure we finish our day and we finish with Mr. Walker, but it sure looks like tomorrow will be off, but I haven't officially canceled it yet.
Okay, I'll keep myself available then. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And I'm sorry, Mr. Hitchings, please go ahead.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah, so we have some panels that we've charted out that we can share, and I thought that at the right time, but I think that would be helpful that if the NGO coordinating parties and others, if they have any folks that they intend to present in a panel format, that we try to exchange those by a certain date. And that will help us with any scheduling challenges that our respective witnesses might have, and if we need to move things around. So you may have already contemplated wanting to get that information, but I wanted to flag that at least.
Yes, thank you. I had contemplated it, but I hadn't actually said anything about it. So when do you, maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Hitchings. When do you think the authority would be in a position to circulate proposed panels of witnesses?
I mean, I think we could circulate ours by Monday, certainly.
Okay, so I'll look to early next week and then I'll ask of other parties what they are looking at. Thank you. And then Ms. Cott, did you have another, is that a residual hand? I'm just not quite sure.
I'm sorry, it is a residual. Do I need to take
Okay.
myself off of it? Okay.
There we
Sorry.
go. That's no problem. I just wanted to make sure. Mr. King, looks like you're next.
Well, I just mention that Mr. Armbaum, I'm not sure what he submitted for rebuttal, but we were kind of confused about what the date was since we weren't part of the November portion of the hearings. And at that point, we were thinking it was going to be December 13th. So I know he sent something in then, but I don't know if that was uploaded. And I don't know what else he may have done. But I just want to mention there was some correspondence around December 13th from him. And I'm not sure what happened subsequent, but maybe it's just in case you want to reach out to him or have him reach out to you. But I know he intended to do something on the rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. King. Just so that based on my view of the FTP site, I don't believe, and I'm looking to my team also, I don't believe we received anything from Mr. Ornbound either in December or yesterday. So
Well,
if there was
yeah.
so that's something maybe if you're able to report to Mr. Ornbound if he intended to, then there may be some technical problem.
Yeah, I know there was an email that was at least sent on the 13th, right around there. So I'll follow up with him and have him follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busher.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to flag, and you may have already done this, so I apologize, but I think the one difference is that we have testimony from DWR and the state water contractors this time. And I sort of assumed that that would happen after sites, but before the protesting parties. But I guess that is the question as to what the order of the witnesses after sites finishes its portion of the rebuttal will be.
That's a good question. Thank you. And I had noticed this. So I guess we don't need to know right now, but that is my intent, that sites would go first and then either state water contractors or DWR next and then following, and we would proceed in that order. It doesn't matter to me sitting here who goes first, but it would be helpful to know. So I think when we set a deadline for parties to submit proposed panels of witnesses of, if any, that I will ask DWR and state water contractors to identify which order they would like to go in. And I probably, yeah, I think. And then Mr. Busher, are you able to speak to any submission of if you are, I realize you're coordinating with other NGOs, but do you have any sense of submitting something in terms of panels of witnesses, whether you be proposing panels?
So I am happy to, if we could have till the 17th, or I guess it'd be the 18th with the holiday, to get that to you. We typically meet on Fridays. I don't know whether we're meeting tomorrow if we get our day back. But if we could have until the 14th to sort that out on our end and then submit it to you early the week of the 17th, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. And did you have anything else procedural to add right now?
I don't think so, and I don't think I have a preference as to the order between DWR and the state water contractors, as long as they are second and third. I think it makes sense to me in whatever order they present.
Great, thank you. Then I'll turn back to Mr. Hitchings. I know the 18th, that's the week we would start on the 21st, but do you have any concerns about receiving proposed panels on the 18th, or would that work for you?
That's fine. I mean, if the order is going to be as we expected, and as you seem to be indicating that we would put on our first panel on the 21st,
right,
which is the next hearing date, I think that's plenty of time. It gives the protestants a chance to coordinate, and I don't think we'll be getting to their witnesses for at least several hearing days. So I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there other, and I will look again, once we finish our day with Mr. Walker, but are there other procedural issues? Mr. Sheets?
The protestants' purview in this round is a little different than the sites authorities was, in that there may be some, and I know for myself, there is some testimony regarding the ITP as well as rebuttal testimony. And for the sites authority, you separated those two into separate rounds of hearings. I was wondering and hoping, and I think my colleagues have also expressed the hope that the protestants could present their testimony all at once without sort of distinguishing between whether it's without having a separate hearing date for rebuttal or direct testimony or whatever. I mean, we can separate out those aspects that are and are not rebuttal, but it seems like a more efficient way to do the entire process is to just have each entity testify once. And if there are issues with whether something is rebuttal or not rebuttal, that can come up on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets. That is certainly my intent, was to proceed that way, that we would hear from the witnesses all at once. And I actually think that I can't really think of what the utility would be of attempting to distinguish rebuttal testimony from responding to the ITP. I mean, to me, it's all coming in on rebuttal. If there are specific, you're right, if there's specific evidentiary issues that come up and objections, we can deal with those. But at this point, I think we're all in one, it's all in one hopper, if you will, from my point of view. So I have that makes sense to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hitchings.
I would just say that the authority agrees that that's the most efficient way to proceed. All of the rebuttal testimony, it's in, as far as I've been able to review so far, it's all in a single piece of written testimony, whether it covers one or both, and it doesn't make sense to parse those out.
Great, thank you. We're all in agreement. That's good. Are there any other procedural issues before we get back to it? Great, then I think where we are was with cross-examination of Mr. Walker. Mr. Busher, I believe you'd completed your cross and had indicated previously that Mr. Schutz might have some questions for Mr. Walker. So if I'll look to my team, and if we can bring up Mr. Walker and Mr. Schutz, and who introduced Mr. Walker? Was it Mr. Ferguson? I can't even remember.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll bring up Mr. Ferguson, please. All right, and then with that, please go ahead, Mr. Sheets.
Good afternoon, Mr. Walker. Nice to see you again. Ms. Mullen, I sent in exhibit CSPA 105 to do cross for Mr. Walker this morning. Could you bring that up, please? And could you go to the next slide, please? While she's doing that, Mr. Walker, to facilitate side-by-side comparison, I took some screenshots of some of your tables, two in fact. That's fine. One is from table 9 from sites 334R. Do you recognize this table, and would you like to have Ms. Mullen pull up page 14 of your exhibit to verify that it's true and correct?
Quick look at it right now, and it looks fine to me, so I don't think that's necessary.
Thank you very much. So could you go on to the next slide, please? Ms. Mullen? Thank you. I also took 2 screenshots from exhibit AHO 48A, page 28. Do you recall the material, or would you like that's on this slide, or would you like Ms. Mullen to pull up the exhibit to refresh your memory?
Let's go ahead and pull it up just because I haven't looked at this one for some time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mullen, could you pull up the AHO 48, page 28, please? And I've done this just simply for ease of comparison. There's no big mystery here. And if you'd scroll down, please. There you go. Well, so the material that I copied is from the paragraph that's shown change in delta outflow and also table 2. Do you see those?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I think for ease of reading, could we please go back to CSPA 105? So, thank you. Mr. Walker, I took the text here to mean that using your tool, you accounted for changes in delta outflow from potential sites diversion as exclusively resulting from sites diversion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And the tool referred to in this passage here is exhibit AHO 49B. Is that also correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay, could we go to slide 4, please? Thank you. And I know this is hard to see, and I've got a blow up in the following slide, but I want to leave it here for a minute just to be clear about the context. On the left, I've highlighted in red the annual average potential diversions for the historical analysis shown in sites 334-R, table 9. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And on the right, I've highlighted in red what you've just confirmed are the annual average potential diversions that you showed in exhibit AHO 49B. Do you
Yes,
see that?
I do.
Okay, could we go to the next slide, please? So here I've just taken screenshots of the numbers that were highlighted in red, and we can go back if anyone is confused about what they are. My question is this: what accounts for the differences and the magnitude of the differences in the historical analysis in sites 334R and AHO 48A?
So there's two things. The first, excuse me, being the kind of smaller effect, are what Mr. Boucher and I discussed earlier. You know, the changes we made to the historical water availability tool to account for travel time and to extend the period of analysis. So that accounts for some of the difference. But the biggest difference here is the numbers that you've pulled from AHO 48, that table. I think as we talked about last time we met, or as stated in that memo several times, those numbers are coming from the tool where we excluded the face value of downstream water rights so as to create a sort of absolute maximum of potential diversions. Whereas the numbers that you've pulled here from sites 334R include those face value amounts because we're attempting to estimate the water that available for appropriation above all existing water rights.
Okay,
And that second point has a much greater effect on the difference here than the first point I mentioned.
so to restate, the figures from sites 334R table 9 include the face value analysis, and the figures from AHO 48A table 2 do not include the face value analysis, correct?
Yes, but just to clarify, I wouldn't call it the face value analysis. It's adding in the face value water right demands of all water users on the Sacramento River downstream of the points of diversion.
And do you include in your in sites 334R a historical analysis, a historical analysis, not an ITP historical analysis, that excludes the face value calculation?
It's in the appendix of 334R.
All right, we'll have a look at that in a minute. Very good. That's helpful to understand. There are other potential differences between the figures here, are there not?
But you mean things that might be causing the potential differences?
Yes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the extended period or extending the period of analysis, adding those 3 years, and then making the changes to account for travel time would cause some change here. But like I said before, the gross majority of this change is that difference on including or not including the face value demands.
Okay. So could we now turn to page 30 of sites 334-R? And that discusses the face value demands, and I'd like to get a better understanding of those. And I believe starts on page 30. There you are. So can you explain to us in brief the difference between the historical analysis with and without the face value demands?
Sure. So I'll just say with face value demands at each of the 5 points that we perform or that we complete the availability calculations in the historical tool, we check flow versus any bypass requirements or the downstream face value water rate demands between that location and the next location. And we accumulate those demands as we move downstream. So that limits what may be able to be diverted at each point of diversion. And then, the condition without the face value water rate demands, we don't include those demands as a potential reduction on flow available at each location. We just consider the bypass flow requirements.
And do you consider any historical levels of actual diversion as opposed to face value demands in that calculation?
We do not. So I think as I explained last or in my previous testimony, that's why this approach is especially conservative, because to some degree we're double counting some water rights, maybe not 100% double counting, but double counting to some degree nonetheless.
And I'm sorry, but could you explain why the reference to double counting and what's being double counted, please?
So just take, for example, say there's a diverter off the Sacramento River who can take, on a given day, they can take 100 acre feet, and say historically they took 50.
Hmm.
And that's built into the gauge data, right? We can probably figure out that they took 50, but within the historical gauge data that we're using, that's built into what that number, to what the available data is. The analysis assumes that we don't know whether they took 50 or maybe they didn't take 50, so we assume that they take their full 100. So by assuming that we're taking their 100, and then if we do end up knowing that on that day they actually took 50, then we're basically saying that they took 150, even though their face value would limit them to 100.
I see. Okay. So this is done primarily in order to evaluate water availability. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Could we go to the last page? And I believe I'm sorry, I don't have the page number. And go down to the bottom, please. So here's table 15, and this is showing, though, with no face value demands. And it's hard for me to express that in the correct way because you kind of have a shorthand for no FV demands, and I might not be saying that correctly.
No, that's correct.
But when this table here is a somewhat less conservative look at how much at potential diversions, correct?
Correct.
And this is under the ITP historical analysis.
Correct.
And do you have a table like this for the historical analysis?
We did not present one, but you could calculate it in the spreadsheet. What is it? Sites 335.
Okay. And so going forward, when one is evaluating potential sites diversions, not simply for the purpose of water availability, but to understand the potential project yield and getting at issues like the cost of water. Would this table here be a more appropriate table to use than table, the one shown above, and I've forgotten the number already?
Objection lacks foundation and vague.
Then table 14.
Sorry, Mr. Schutz, I didn't know. I thought you were finished. Objection lacks foundation and vague.
Which part, please?
Well, he talked about more appropriate, and I don't know what he's referring to when he talks about appropriateness.
All right, Mr. Schutz, maybe you can address.
I'll try to rephrase the question.
Yeah.
Mr. Walker, why did you present Appendix 1B in your memo?
I think as you identified before, it's a less conservative view of potential diversions.
And in your view, is it a more accurate view of potential diversions?
It could be, but I think as we've talked about before, this tool is not really set up to be a kind of operations tool or an effects tool. It's really showing the maximum possible numbers. If the authority diverted it literally every day to the maximum volume that it could, which I think we all know is not realistic.
You've worked in water for quite a few years, have you not, Mr. Walker?
I have, yes.
About how many?
Oh, I've been in MBK for almost 8 years, so
Okay.
a little bit more than
Um,
that. I'll say 8.
And you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different water users and diverters, have you not?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
In your experience, do water users and diverters divert whenever they can, given physical and regulatory constraints?
Objection vague and calls for speculation.
Operational.
I think that's the sustained. Mr. Schutz, where are we going with this?
Mr. Walker said that Sites Authority or other entities will not divert the maximum possible amounts of diversion. My question goes to whether they will divert whenever they reasonably can. And, putting it differently, will they leave water on the table if there's an opportunity to divert?
Let me ask, I'll jump in and ask the question this way to Mr. Walker. When you stated that it was not your understanding or your belief that the authority would divert to the maximum amount at every opportunity, what were the factors that you considered in making that statement?
I think as we've talked about before, this analysis, again, this analysis is an operations tool, so it's not considering what may be in storage in the reservoir already. It doesn't consider what the Tehama-Clusa Canal Authority or GCID might be doing at their facilities and whether there's available diversion capacity. Another thing, this accounts for any day where there may be diversions, and that could be 100 CFS, but based off of the operational requirements and coordination and power scheduling and all that, the authority may not determine that it's worth it to divert 100 CFS for a day. Those are probably the big things, but I don't think that's purely an exhaustive list.
That makes sense. Thank you. That was helpful for me, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Schutz.
Absent lack of space in the reservoir or lack of diversion capacity or de minimis opportunities to divert, as a general matter, isn't it likely, in your opinion, based on your experience, that the Sites Authority will divert whenever they can?
Objection calls for speculation and asked and answered to some extent.
I'll say sustained. I think, Mr. Schutz, I know where you're going and I understand the point. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Walker, for your work. It's very illuminating.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. I will look to the coordinating NGO parties. Is there any other representative that would like to ask questions of Mr. Walker? Are there any tribal representatives who have questions for Mr. Walker? Then I will look to Mr. Reese. Do you have questions for Mr. Walker?
I do not have questions for Mr. Walker.
Thank you. Ms. Meserve, do you have questions for Mr. Walker?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. King, you are at time, but I will give you some leeway if you have questions for Mr. Walker.
Joining Officer Conzi, I have one question.
Great.
So Mr. Walker, in the question, Mr. Busher, you mentioned that in the rebuttal testimony, you're going to reference the November 2024 flows, saying that the authority could have diverted under that scenario of this most recent November. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, was there any discussion, or is there any reference to actually impounding water from Funk's Creek and Stone Crown Creek in this scenario as of this November 2024?
No, and we don't. I don't believe we have any available data to suggest whether that would or would not be possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. I had one question for Mr. Walker, which I will try to and you may not be the right person for this, but I'll ask it anyway. With respect to, let me pull up my notes here. With respect to the 986,000 acre-foot maximum diversion restriction in the incidental take permit, do you have any information about how that number was? My understanding is it came from the ITP application itself. Is that your understanding as well?
Correct. Yes.
Do you have any illumination about how that number was arrived at by the authority?
So a number of the limitations in the ITP, including that one, are based off of the modeling from the calcium 2 modeling that CDFW was able to evaluate. And it's simply just that was the maximum in the model. So that was the maximum that they, feel legally allowed to, and I may be saying this incorrectly, but that they feel legally allowed to permit to.
Thank you for that. If we were to look for this $986,000 acre foot number in what you described as the modeling, is there what document should we look to? Where would we find that?
That's a good question, but I can tell you it's the calcium 2 model with 2035 climate change. I know it comes from that model.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. That's my only question, so I will look back to Mr. Ferguson. Do you have any redirect for Mr. Walker?
I do have a few questions.
Great, please.
Yes. So, Mr. Walker, do you recall Mr. Busher's questions about whether you applied condition 9.4, the operations ITP, which limits maximum annual diversions to 986,000 acre feet, to your analysis of potential diversions in your ITP historical analysis?
Yes, I do.
And I believe you stated that you had not applied the condition, and that is why you included footnotes 6 and 7 in your memo, which is cites 334R. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And did you also say that by not applying the condition, it probably resulted in potential diversions on a few additional days and a small increase in the annual average volume of diversions?
That's correct.
During our lunch break, did you have an opportunity to review your model or spreadsheet tool to determine how application of condition 9.4 would affect the volume of potential diversions in your results?
I did, yes.
Can you please explain whether and how application of condition 9.4 affects the volume of potential diversions in your results?
Sure, and maybe to help do this, I'd ask if Ms. Mullen, you could pull up sites 336. And go a couple slides up. I think it's slide 15. 14, sorry. Oh, I'm wrong again, sorry. let me pull it up so I can, slide 13. Apologies. Yes, so applying the annual caps from the ITP would reduce the total annual average there in column 3 from 255,000 acre feet to 247,000 acre feet. And that's made up of a 3,000 acre foot reduction to the annual average diversion at the TCC point of diversion and an approximate 5,000 acre foot reduction to the GCID point of diversion annual average.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. No further questions.
Thank you. I will look to Mr. Busher. Do you have, based on that limited redirect, do you have additional questions?
Give me 1 second, please. Mr. Walker, is the only number that changes the number or like the column that you identified on slide 13?
You mean the values in that column?
Correct.
Yeah, just those numbers.
And I mean, would the
Oh,
maximum
yeah, the
diversion
maximum.
also go down?
Correct. Yeah, it would. So the maximum at the GCID would go to 421, and then the total would go to 986.
And then if we could put 336 on the screen and look at slide 13. And so that the annual average and maximum average would change on this slide, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then if we go to slide 14, is the ITP historical analysis, the 255 there, that also becomes 246 or 247, the same change?
It would be, but I'd caution from looking at this slide too much because we would need to apply the same caps to the historic. Or no, I'm sorry. That's correct. Yeah.
And then if we go to the last page, 17, same result there. The first row, those two numbers change, the annual and maximum potential diversion.
Correct.
As you described. The rest of the numbers in this chart also stay the same?
Correct.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. Mr. Schutz, do you have any follow-up questions?
I do not, thank you.
And Mr. King, do you have any follow-up based on that limited redirect?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? I don't think I missed anyone. All right, then with that, thank you, Mr. Walker, for being here and testifying with us today. I very much appreciate it. You are excused.
Thank you.
And we did a fine job of working through the ITP related witnesses. I will now at this point, well, let me look to the room. Is there anything? My plan is to officially take off calendar our remaining 3 hearing days for this portion of the hearing, and we would reconvene on February 21st. Am I getting that? Is anyone object to that in any way? All right, so then I will officially take off calendar tomorrow, February 7th, as well as February 11th and 12th. And we'll plan to see all of you again on the 21st when we start rebuttal. I would like to see proposed panels of witnesses, if any, submitted to the AHO or the site's email inbox and the service list, as well as a proposal from DWR and state water contractors as to which of you would like to present your witness first on February 18th. And are there any other procedural issues we should address at this time before we break until the 21st? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and we are adjourned. See you on the 21st.
Thank you.